But before we do the activity, I want us to read a bit more of the story. So we've got a bit more familiarity with some of the characters. So if you can grab your books again, and again, if you can just briefly turn to this page with all the characters on, I'll give you a quick recap of what's been happening in the story, because we are going to jump ahead. So earlier in the day, we met Rab and Robbie, and we found out a bit about the walk and where they live. And we kind of discovered that there's this tension between the families leading up to the wedding of Romeo and Kylie. And we're going to jump past some things, but basically there's a lot of conversations go on throughout the day between various characters, and we get to find out how each character on the walk feels about this impending wedding. As you can imagine, the two grands aren't too chuffed, but there's also a bit of suspense, a bit of tension in the air, because Malky here on the McGowan side, he was mentioned in the first scene. He's out the Bar L, and he's not happy about this wedding, and there's a worry that he's going to come into town and cause a bit of trouble. And then on the other side of things, you've got Johnny Black, who's sort of the father figure of the Black family, and he's also saying that it's over his dead body that this is going to go ahead, and he's going to cause a scene. So by the time we get to the church, tension is running high, there's a lot of worries about what it is that's going to happen. And the only thing that lightens the mood is Wheezy turns up dressed as Wonder Woman. And Gran says, you have to go home and change your clothes, and she won't. She wants to come along dressed as a superhero. So we're going to find out what happens at this wedding. You can turn to page 96. We're outside the church. Outside the church, the two families glare at each other as Father O'Brien addresses them. Reverend Scott, who is a new character you haven't met before, stands by him.
Good afternoon. Can I begin by saying how wonderful it is to see you all here?
Where's my grandson? Where's Romeo?
Done a runner, no doubt, gutless toe ragging.
If you could give me a moment to explain.
Well, I don't see your Kylie either.
I have a letter here.
No wonder, she'll be mortified.
Good. We all know Romeo can do better.
How dare you, you nasty wee...
Shut up for 1 minute.
There is a stunned silence.
Apologies. Ladies, but if you'll just listen, Romeo and Kylie came to see me an hour ago.
I knew it. The wedding's off.
Not exactly. Reverend Scott and I both blessed their union and sent them on their way.
What? This is all your fault, Therese McGowan.
My fault? How is it my fault?
They asked me to read this letter to you.
I can't believe there'll be no wedding.
For pity's sake, just let the man speak.
You'll read to the end of the book, and then you'll find this almost blank page. The only thing that's on it is this final jump-off point and the words, what happens next? The what happens next activity, Corin is going to come round and hand out some grid-type sheets, which you can find, as well as being on the handout, they're also in the back of the book. So all the other activities you can find online. This one's online as well, but it's also in the back of the book because we really want to encourage you to do this particular activity. So even if you can't get online for whatever reason, hopefully you can photocopy the sheet, get all the stuff that you need from the back of the book. What Corin is bringing you is a version, a much prettier version of this grid, which has 4 columns in it. Revenge, uncertainty, reconciliation, and forgiveness. And I want you to think a little bit about the characters that you've met. I know you haven't got to know them in depth as the way you would if you read the whole book, but hopefully you've got a flavour of who they are and how they feel about things. And you can use the character pages in the front of the book to help you as well, to remind you who's who and who's related to who. But in your groups, what I'd like you to do is discuss each character and decide where they are at the end of the book, when we get to that what happens next question. So do they fall into revenge? Are they looking to do something to get back at somebody? Do they fall into uncertainty? Are they not sure what they're going to do next? Are they looking to reconcile? Do they feel guilty? Do they want to make things up to people? Or are they in the forgiveness column? Are they at the stage where they want to forgive people and they want to move on? I want you to have a bit of discussion about all the characters and decide which column each one falls into. Corinne's brought you a sheet of all the characters' faces, which looks a bit like this. And I want you to use that to remind you who everybody is. And once you've decided between yourselves which column that particular character goes into, I want you to peel them off that sticker sheet and stick them onto the grid sheet that you've got in front of you. That's the first part of the exercise. I'm going to let you do that, and then there's a second bit which we'll come to in a minute. So have a discussion, stick them down on that sheet, and then we'll see where you've got to. Okay? When you get to the point that you've got your characters all in place on the grid, where you think they are at the end of the book, what I'd then like you to do, you'll notice that it says on the stickers, Karen should, or Rab should. This is the second part of the exercise. Once you've got, let's say, Rab in place on the board, let's say you've put him in uncertainty, he's not very sure what he's going to do next. What I want you to do is discuss what can Rab do to move in a positive direction across the grid. You might not necessarily get him to forgiveness. You might think, you know, his little sister's just been stabbed. He's not automatically going to forgive everybody involved. But is there any way you can move him even one column and get him into a place of reconciliation? This is just an example. And I want you to discuss for each character what actions they could take to potentially move in that positive direction. Even if it's just moving to somewhere on the cusp between two columns, what can they do to move in a positive direction? And once you've come up with an action or a couple of actions for each character, I want you to get a new set of these stickers and start to write on them the actions that this person can take. And if you want to do this together, so you just need one more sheet of these, write on for each character what action you think they can take, and then I'm going to ask each of you to come and stick them on this board and talk about the actions that you've come up with. So just chat amongst yourselves. What can these people do to improve the situation? Every time I've done this activity with learners, I've got a different end result, which means it's a truly learner-led activity, thanks to the interactive ending element. It's a real cliffhanger when you get to that what happens next side of things, and that's very deliberate, and I want to kind of tell you a bit about why we've decided to do that. The interactive ending choice for this book was inspired by Skint. You remember I mentioned this other graphic novel that we've done. And in Skint, you get to the end of the story, and there are 3 possible options that when you finish reading the story, you can choose which you think is the best option for the characters. And it's not about this is the right option and this is the wrong option. It's about consequences of choice. So if the character chooses to do this ending, that would have certain consequences, and the others would have different consequences. This is slightly different, it's slightly more open. But we learned from Skint that interactive ending choices have a lot of really positive benefits. It's much better than coming to the end of the book and just closing it and walking away. So some of those benefits are, obviously it really engages the people who are reading the book. Like I say, they don't just get to close it and walk away and not think about it again. It's an ongoing thing. You can go away and think, okay, this time we put Wheezy in the forgiveness column and she just stayed there. But there's also the possibility that she could go backwards to the revenge column and find herself feeling very angry about what's happened to her, you know, and what would that lead to? So there's lots of different potential options, and it keeps you thinking, and therefore you're more engaged with the story for longer. This kind of activity also checks comprehension. I mean, if you had someone coming up and putting Malky in the forgiveness column straight away, for example, you might realise that perhaps this person hasn't totally grasped the plot of the book 100% and maybe need to go back and do some more work. That's quite an extreme example, but it does check comprehension. It's quite useful for that. You can see that it develops empathy. Rose, you were saying, I was trying to be all nice and positive and hopefully the Grands will, you know. that's good. That's what we want from learners. We want them to start thinking, well, maybe the grands are just slightly misunderstood. Maybe all they need is whatever, let's try and get on board and understand where they're coming from. And it's always positive to try and understand the perspectives of other people who are different to you. This kind of activity can challenge attitudes. As Corin's already mentioned, we've seen evidence that learners have come up to do this activity and then they have voiced attitudes that they have that have been challenged or even just slightly prodded a little bit by this activity. So it can challenge attitudes, and it's potentially possible that activities like this can lead to changes in attitude. There is a second part to this particular activity. It's part of the What Happens Next activity, and it kind of bolts on to this bit. And I'm going to get you to do that now. This might look quite familiar. Corin, do you mind handing out the sheets for this? This one's called the responsibility ladder. I know it will look familiar to you. It will probably look familiar to any of you who do anti-sectarianism work already. This is a really commonly used activity. It was developed by Sense Over Sectarianism and Stand Up to Sectarianism. And this is just our version of that. They've given us permission to use it. You can see we've got this lovely ladder that's been drawn by Jill, our illustrator. And on the sheet that you've got coming round at the top, you've got this list of individuals and organisations. And what I would like you to do, first of all, and you can do this on your own or you can chat in your groups, it's up to you. I would like you to think about who's responsible for tackling sectarianism, and I'd like you to rank those individuals and organisations on that ladder with the person or organisation that you think should take the most responsibility at the top, and then so on down. Who's the most important person in terms of fighting sectarianism? If you want, you can also do it from the bottom up, if that's easier. And then once you've got your ranking on the ladder, I want you to go into the second column, which says, what could this person or these people do? And I want you to think of some positive actions, again, like the ones we've already talked about, that could be done by these people or these organisations to tackle sectarianism. I think the main takeaway from this activity is there is no right or wrong answer. And again, it's a bit like that location map activity that we did. Whatever you get in response to this is useful. Interestingly, Learner Group 1 put teachers and educators at the top, which their tutor was chuffed about. They were kind of saying it's up to the people who are in a professional capacity to teach us about this stuff, teach about the differences between people in a positive way. And then on the other side, we've got Learner Group 2 who've done the same as quite a lot of you and put me at the top. And this is where the second column is really, really interesting, to see what learners are coming up with as possible solutions or possible ways to tackle sectarianism. So you'll see that they've twigged that you should report any sectarianism you encounter to the police, which is positive, but they're also saying don't be sectarian yourself. So that's kind of what you were saying about take responsibility for your own behaviour, and talk to people about it, which is what you were saying about kind of ask people why they hold these views. But then if you look elsewhere, you've also got really interesting things like these learners were aware that there's greater police manpower needed in some places, they felt. And on this side, saying that it's up to your friends to help you understand what's banter and what's offensive and tell you when a joke's out of line and all this kind of thing. The reason this is such a good activity to do after the What Happens Next is because in this activity, you're talking about what are the positive behaviours that we can do, but it's very much what are the positive behaviours that the fictional characters can do. It's still looking at it through a fictional lens. This is kind of a similar thing, but it puts it in a real world context. It takes it out of that fictional side of things. And this is learners now thinking about what can I personally do? What can I talk to my friends about doing? What should the police or politicians or media, what should they be doing? So hopefully this is a kind of an awareness raising activity that gives everything a bit more of a real world kind of focus. If you need any more information about any aspect of Walk the Walk, you can visit scottishbooktrust.com/walk the walk. You'll find all of the online supporting materials ready to download on that site. There's also a frequently asked questions page, so if you have any questions, they may already be answered there.